The Gates Cambridge Scholarship is one of the most prestigious fully funded scholarships for international students in the world. In this video, you're going to learn the application process, the application documents, and the application strategy that you can use to be the next Gates Cambridge Scholar. So please enjoy and make sure you take notes because you're going to need it when you apply for the scholarship. Welcome. Please, can you introduce yourself?
Hi, Sylvie. Thank you very much for inviting me to share about my journey on the Gates Cambridge Scholarship. It's an honor to be here. So I am Cynthia Okoye. I am a Nigerian. I am in my third year of my PhD at the University of Cambridge, where I am studying in the pharmacology department. And my work is looking to develop peptide and protein molecules that can target problematic or disease implicated proteins for degradation and hence be therapeutics.
Okay, I see. And let's just talk a bit about your scholarship, the Gates Cambridge scholarship. So you got into the program what, like 3 years ago, 2 years
Yes,
ago?
in 2018. In
Uh-huh.
2018, so about 2.5 years ago now.
All right. So about the application process, like what are the steps involved from the start till the end of the application process of this scholarship?
Right. So the nice thing about the Gates Cambridge Scholarship is that you do it at the same time as sort of the admissions application. So sort of the paperwork in terms of the essays and the proposal and all the other documents are submitted at the same time as you submit your application for admissions to the program. So there's that. Um, and the deadline is different if you're a US citizen or if you're an international citizen. So I applied as an international student. So for me, that was around December. And so you submit the application. Then there's the second round, which is an interview round. And you would usually hear back around springtime, so around March. And you get called back for the interview. For me, I was in the US at the time and it didn't make any sense to fly to the UK, get a visa and all of that. So I opted to use the online version. So back in the day, yeah, we used Skype and, I had a panel, I think about two or three people on the interview panel and just 30 minutes, which actually went by very quickly. We just discussed, my application, my PhD proposal, and my interests. And then after that, like as within as little as like 48 hours, I heard back on the decision. So that's pretty much the process.
Oh, wow.
It's not really drawn out or anything. Yeah, it's
Mhm.
pretty straightforward.
Wow, that's so different from my own process. Mine, the MEC scholarship, it takes like a year for y'all to go
Oh
through the
wow,
process. There's primary selection, there's secondary selection. So it's interesting
wow.
to hear that it isn't drawn out. And as a PhD student, I know based on the things that I've read about the scholarship, you're supposed to have like a supervisor, like
Mhm.
someone who is going to supervise your research. How did you get to the people? Like, is there a portal that provides contacts of all the professors? How did you get your professor?
Right. I knew that I wanted to do a PhD in the biosciences and how different schools will coordinate it differently. So I was familiar with the US system because I did my undergraduate degree there. And that's pretty much where I was actually planning to go before I came across Cambridge. But yeah, with the Cambridge system, it's a bit different. But basically there are different departments that fall under biological sciences. There's pathology, pharmacology, biochemistry, etc. So I just went to all the different department websites and then I looked at all the principal investigators, basically the people who are leading research in the department, and I looked at their topics and saw which ones were interesting to me based on my background and also what I was interested in. And so then I wrote those names down, and those were the people I then contacted. So their emails are also listed on the website.
Mm,
And so I sent them an email introducing myself and
mm,
also attaching my CV
mm,
to just highlight some of my experience
mm,
and my background.
mm.
And so I think I sent about 7 emails. These were all cold emails. I didn't know them through anyone or anything. So I was just kind of having my fingers crossed with it. And I was lucky. I got about 4 responses back And of course I sent reminders as well. It's normal sometimes, things just get under the radar. So yeah, I eventually got about four responses. And there are different reasons for different things. So like one of them, for instance, said he was retiring. So of course there was no way anything could work through there. And then I proceeded, I believe, about two, where we had like more back and forth conversations, and we even had Skype calls. We talked about the projects they had specifically in mind, because a lot of times they just have like summaries on the website, but the actual project that they want a PhD student to come in and do might be quite different. So it's always important to make sure that you discuss that, you understand, and everyone's on the same page.
Mhm.
And then the proposal is not something that you're supposed to like necessarily generate out of thin air. Like, it's good to discuss this with the supervisor. So I talked to them, I showed them the proposal. I was like, how does this look? They
Mhm.
gave me like little corrections and all of that, and that was the final version that I had. um so yeah, I mean, was definitely like communicating with the
Mhm.
potential supervisor and making
Mhm.
sure that
Mhm.
it looked good.
Okay. So in that case, do you have to contact like the supervisors way ahead of time? Because it seems like this back and forth can take a while.
Yes, definitely. It's very, very important to start quite early.
Mm.
So I believe I started around the summertime is a good time, because at that time, they're not teaching lectures, so they are also more likely to respond, to get back to you. So
Mm.
yeah, that's a good time to like start sending out these cold emails and sending reminders.
Mhm.
Um, and it just also helps you, to get things done and done very well. So
Mhm.
yeah, definitely start early, so that there's enough time to send reminders, there's enough time to get feedback and everything.
Okay, I see. And is there a possibility that a supervisor can say, yes, I'm willing to have you in my department, and then you don't get the scholarship? Is that a possibility? Or is it that everybody that gets a yes from a supervisor automatically gets the scholarship? Do you have any idea about that?
Hmm. Yeah, I'm not very sure, right? Because the people who usually end up coming are the people who get the funding. So I'm not so sure, but I imagine that people would experience this. I imagine
Uh-huh.
that it would be the case, because scholarships are limited, and
Yeah.
the funding body is different from like
Yeah.
the admissions body.
Yeah.
Basically, the
Yeah. Yeah.
department just has to decide whether they're like willing to take you on, and then scholarships are doing their own thing. So I
Mm-hmm.
imagine that it is possible.
Mm-hmm.
I've just never really met anyone who's had that
That,
situation.
yeah. Yeah. I'm just trying to think through like what can happen? Like what can go wrong
Right,
here? Yeah.
right, yeah.
And when you are like ready to do your application, you have to go through the Gates Cambridge Scholarship Portal. That's where the application process takes place. Is it, just to pick your brain a bit about that portal? When you go in there, how is it structured? Is it a kind of a portal where you can start doing the application and then you save and then you go and get some documents and you come and continue? Is it, or is it like when you get in and start, you have to go through till the end and submit within a short period of time? How does it look like in there?
Yeah, I mean, it looks like every other portal, I think. At least my experience with portals, you can
Uh-huh.
save and come back.
Okay.
But I mean, I would advise for the essays, I mean, just write those on a Word documents, because I
Mhm.
mean, you also get the benefit of autocorrect with
Yeah.
words. So yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, so you can definitely save and submit, and then so it's the same as the platform that you're going to use to apply to your department. So you
Mhm.
start with your personal information and all of those things, and then you go into like the course specific questions. So these are the questions that your department wants to know. So like, what projects will you be doing? What are your career goals? Like, what is your background or your skills to show that you're good fit for that. So for those ones, you want to kind of be technical and make sure that you know what you're getting into and you have the right background for that. And then you get into like the scholarship section. So the nice thing about the Cambridge application actually is that you can actually apply for most of the scholarships at the same time as well.
Mhm.
So when back in my day, I just had to tick a box and was like, oh, consider me for all the scholarships I'm eligible for, right? Because some scholarships are for people from certain countries or people in
Mm.
certain situations as well. So they have all that information and they can do that. But what I hear these days is that people had to write an essay, an additional essay to the Cambridge Trust for all those other scholarship considerations. So yeah, I guess you'd have to write that essay and add that on there. And then you get to like the Gates section. So Gates is a bit extra. They want you to write a Gates statement, which is about 500 words, which actually ends up being very little to like showcase all of these things that would make you a good candidate. And then they want you to also submit a CV, which should be straightforward. They also want you to submit like a reference. So usually this is someone who has mentored you in like, a great capacity. They've probably known you for a few years and they can speak to things other than your academic ability. And then the last thing, if you are applying for a PhD, to submit a PhD proposal, which we've also kind of talked about on how to go about that. So those were like the main things I remember. And then of course, you have to pay. So it's 70 pounds, I believe, is the application fee to submit an application. The nice thing is with the same 70 pounds, you can submit to 3 different programs. So you can get the most of your money if you apply to 3 different courses. But yeah, that's also something to keep in mind if finances might be an issue.
I see. Okay. And let's just talk a bit about the statement, because when I saw it, like they say 3,000 characters, 500 words, and I was thinking that is less than a page. How were you able to, what did you write? Did you write a copy, then came back and did a summary, then came back and did a summary? How did you approach writing 500 words to explain everything? How did you do that?
Right. So I think it's important again to start early and give yourself the time to come back to it. It's never a good idea to just wake up one day and be like, okay, I'm writing this application. You just write all your essays and then submit the same day. So definitely give yourself that time to come back. But yeah, it's quite tricky cutting down on the words. But you find that in a way it's good because the things that end up being there are the things that are essentials. Like every word deserved its place in that essay. So I mean, for me, how I approached it was basically I went on their website. So if you go on the website, they have this thing, a page called the criteria. So this is what they're looking for in an ideal candidate. And they have 4 things listed. So they say academic excellence, leadership capacity, a reason for the course that you've chosen to study, and a commitment to improving the lives of others. And so the way you're writing the essay should sort of reflect all of these 4 qualities. But of course, you don't want to be too boring and just be like, I have academic excellence. So you want to craft it very nicely, but still showcase, all of these 4 things. So for me, that was pretty much how I went about it.
So you just followed the 4 things that were required, and then you tried to like tell a story around those 4 things.
Right. Exactly.
And you mentioned a reference letter that is required. I just want to ask, like, is it something that has to? Did you get it from like a former supervisor, from a former boss? Like, is it academic or is it like more of professional?
Right. So I mean, I was a student at the time. I was just completing my undergraduate. So to be honest, I only had professors to write me recommendations. So all my referees were professors. But for me, I chose. So I mean, normally I think people would choose their supervisors, but that supervisor, she had just moved that year, so she'd only known me actually for less than a year. So I felt like, an older supervisor, professor who, even though they were not my supervisor, like but knew me better, would be like a better person to write that reference for me. So I asked that person. So this is someone who, had mentored me through the years in my undergraduate journey. For instance, had like, I talked to them about summer internships and they like directed me in the right way, and I'd invited to my dance performances and all those kinds of things. So like he really kind of knew me more holistically.
Yeah. So it's better if you're going to go about asking for a reference letter, it's better to ask someone who knows you, who has some level of information about you outside of just your academics,
yes,
right?
Exactly. But you still want to use someone who still is like kind of professional or still has some sort of authority, because for instance you don't want to ask a classmate, right? Or like maybe if you're in a bigger school, you don't want to ask like a PhD student. You still want to like go with like maybe a postdoc or a professor, so someone still at a higher level.
Yeah, I see. And how many do they require? Do they require one recommendation letter, two or three?
Yeah, so just one for the special Gates reference, but then the academic program requires two recommendations. So in total, for the full application, you'll be having three.
Okay. Yeah. And the CV that you mentioned, is it just like a regular CV that they want, that you just have to write up a normal CV?
I think this is a regular CV, I think. I mean, I basically just highlighted my research experience, and then my leadership experience and my teaching experience, because I did have quite a bit of teaching experience to make a category out of it. So yeah, I mean, that's pretty much how my CV still is today. So
okay.
Yeah.
All right, because I've heard people talk about I was interviewing one scholar in who is studying in Belgium, and he was talking about the European format of CV. So for that wasn't the case. It was just a regular CV, right?
Right. Yeah. It was just a regular CV, and I'm sure people had different formats that they were following as well. There wasn't like a sort of set format that you had to follow or anything. Yeah.
Okay, all right. And let's just talk about your research proposal. Is your research proposal something that you had been doing in the master's and that you wanted to continue to the PhD, or how did you get about having the idea of your research proposal?
Right. So for the research proposal, so I applied straight for the PhD program, even though I was coming from an undergraduate level. And it's quite normal. So in the US, it's quite normal to go straight to a PhD in the biosciences. It seems to be less common here in the UK. But so that was my plan. And so I was writing for a PhD level type of work, and I came straight to a PhD as well. So yeah, everything I was writing with the vision of a long term kind of experiment. And like I mentioned, I definitely communicated with my supervisors and got them to have their inputs as well and give me some feedback. And in terms of structuring, it's kind of like just starting out with the significance. So like, why is this work important? How would it be beneficial? Why? Because I mean, I think it's always good to think about these things as an investment before investing money, right? So it's like, why should we invest money in this work? So you start with that, and then we get them engaged, and then you go into like the background of the science, and then the methods. Very important to write the methods to show that you actually know exactly what you're going to be doing. And then after the methods, it's just like a short conclusion. And then references. Always a good idea to also reference so that it looks like you know what you're doing. I mean, you should know what you're doing, but I mean, sometimes you might not be thinking about these things, but they're actually important. So yeah, definitely add some references as well. And I guess another thing I would say about the proposal is to try and so you want to like look like you know what you're doing, mention those words, like say what the techniques are, but try to still keep it as simple as possible so that a lay person can understand what you're writing, because you want them to also still understand what you're saying. So if you can, you don't have to make it super complicated, because especially in the sciences, there's always so many abbreviations, like all these proteins and the abbreviations. Like if you don't need to mention it, don't. Just let it go. And if you can use like a more lay term, just use that. So yeah, I think that's the other thing I would say about that.
Okay, and that's it, right? You have the CV, the research proposal, the statement, and that is it about the documents that are required at the scholarship level.
Pretty much, yes.
Okay, I just want to ask you, because you mentioned earlier about you had like an interview with them on Skype. What was it? What was it like? Do you remember the questions they asked you during the interview?
Yeah, I think that day I remember I was quite nervous, but it went by so quickly. I didn't even realize when the end came, and was like, oh, that was a nice conversation. So yeah, I mean, don't be anxious is the first tip. But then it was also helpful to practice. So again, this idea of getting feedback is so important, right? Because just having somebody else give you their opinion, give you an eye in what this looks like from an outside perspective is
Mm-hmm.
always important.
Mm-hmm.
So I did have, like, some mock interviews beforehand.
Mm-hmm.
So my friend was really nice and she did a few with me. And then I was really touched by this, actually. The fellowships office at my university organized like they got my professors together, about three of them, and just like organized like a small in-person interview for me, and they
Wow.
video recorded me as well so that I could go back and watch it. And I just thought that that was really, really nice of them. And I
Yeah.
don't know,
Yeah.
I've been very lucky and blessed to have supporters all the way in my
Yeah.
journey. So all of that was really nice to help me, get prepared to answer those questions and just get my composure right.
Mm-hmm.
And even like tips about having like an online interview, for instance, like
Mm-hmm.
putting your camera at eye level, making sure
Mm-hmm.
your background is good, all
Mm-hmm.
of those things, how to think about those things.
Mm-hmm.
But then on the day of the conversation, so you have a panel. I believe they have about 3 to 4 different panels for depending on your fields, because they want you to also talk about your work. So the people on the panel should be able to understand roughly what you're saying. So there was
Mm-hmm.
one for biological sciences, and then
Mm-hmm.
physical sciences, and then humanities.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I went on the biological sciences panel, and
Mm-hmm.
I had normally there's 3 people, but that day I had 2 people, and I'm not sure I can remember exactly the questions now, but I think roughly they definitely asked me like how I was going to do what I was saying on my proposal. So again, this idea of they really want to know that you know what you're coming to
Okay.
do. This
Mm-hmm.
is a big investment. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, they were like, so how exactly are you going to do this experiment? And then I
Mm-hmm.
explained, roughly, oh, I'm going to do this to the DNA and then use fluorescence microscopy. So, just explain that. And then they also wanted to know a bit about me, like beyond academics. So they asked
Mm-hmm.
me about the dancing, because I was part of a dance group in my undergrad, and I was in a few other leadership things. So they also asked me a bit about that, why I liked it. And it was just nice to talk about those other interests as well. Um, those were the main things I remember. But yeah, it did go by very quickly. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It was a
Okay.
nice experience.
Okay. All right. So now we are wrapping up. So I'm just going to ask you. As I told you before, this scholarship is a very prestigious scholarship. There are so many people that are interested in applying for it. They want to have information about it. As someone who is a scholar, who is a Gates scholar, you've gone through the process. You've had it. You know what it's like and what these students will be going through. What advice will you give, like students who are hoping to get the Gates Cambridge scholarship?
Right. So I actually wrote down a few things. I'm going
Okay.
to refer back to my notes. I think I have
Okay.
4 points, four
Okay.
things.
Yes. Yes,
And
please.
honestly, this applies to Gates, and I think it would apply to anything else, really. So whether you're applying to Gates or anything else, just I guess take it. So I have 4 things. The first one we've already mentioned, to start early, to do, to work on things, do your research so that you can also have enough time to edit and get feedback. So start early. Then do your research well. Make sure that you're going somewhere where you're going to fit well. You don't want to be mismatched. And you also want to make sure you're going to a supportive environment. Sometimes it's not just about the name of the place. You want to also make sure that you go to a place where you'll be supported and championed, and you come out, a much better person totally at the end. So you want to also make sure that you get that done as well. Um, Again, get feedback. So important. If I had submitted the first essay I wrote, I would not have gotten the scholarship. So get feedback and practice. And then the last thing, which I think is sometimes I tend to come across this with people who are applying, this idea of selling yourself well. I feel like sometimes people undersell themselves, and just I think maybe spend some time and reflecting, and just know that like on paper is where they get to meet you first before they then get to meet you, in person or in an interview. So you want to make sure that what you're saying on paper kind of really reflects your strong qualities. Of course, don't overdo it, don't lie, but you want to make sure that you really put yourself out there. And I mean, I guess I talk to mostly Africans. I don't know if it's an African thing or not, where it's like humility or something. But you should sell yourself. So, like for instance, right, if you just say, "Well, I am a dancer," or "I was in a dance group in university," that's a lot different from saying, "I was part of a dance ensemble that met 7 hours every week for rehearsals and produced two major shows annually." That's a whole lot different. And now you've been more specific, and just from that statement, you can already start to see, well, there's commitment. If they're spending several hours in rehearsal, there's excellence. You're producing an annual show. So, there's a lot of things that come through when you try to be more specific about what you're saying about yourself. So I think those are the four tips that I have for people who are applying scholarships.
Okay, thank you so much, Cynthia, for taking the time. I am very grateful that you decided and accepted to be here. I'm sure this is going to go a long way to help so many scholars. So thank you so much for being here.
And thank you so much for inviting me. I mean, it was a pleasure to really discuss and reminisce the process. And I hope I'll be happy if this is helpful to other people.
Yeah. Was that helpful? If it was, please do well to subscribe, hit the like icon, and let's discuss in the comment section. Are you going to be applying for this scholarship, or is there any other fully funded scholarship you are going to be applying for? Thank you guys so much for being here. Please do well to come back because I post videos every week. You can hit the notifications icon so you'll be informed each time I post a scholarship. I'm going to see you all in the next one. I love you.